The therapist's office smelled of stale air and cheap vanilla plugins, a cloying combination I had come to associate with managed despair. It was a beige room, with beige art on the walls, and a therapist, Dr. Albright, who offered a beige, placid smile that never quite reached her eyes. It was a room designed to neutralize, to smooth over the jagged edges of a life coming apart at the seams. Beside me, my husband, Liam, performed his role with the practiced ease of a seasoned actor. He was the concerned spouse, his voice a smooth, reasonable balm of lies. He spoke of our communication issues, his hand resting on my knee in a gesture that, to Dr. Albright, must have looked supportive. To me, it felt like a brand. "I just feel like we need to rebuild that foundation of trust," he was saying, his expression a perfect portrait of earnest sincerity. "Whatever it takes, Ilara, I'm an open book." His words were a meaningless drone, a familiar soundtrack to my silent suffering. For months I had been the one to cry in this room, the one to plead, the one whose pain was the central topic of discussion. But today was different. Today, my focus was not on his words, but on his wrist. He gestured with his hand to emphasize a point about his commitment, and the cuff of his expensive shirt slid back. There, against his skin, glinted a delicate silver chain. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful little snag. It wasn't a watch, it was a woman's bracelet. More than that, it was the bracelet, a piece I had spent weeks designing with a jeweler in the city, a custom gift for my sister Amelia's last birthday. It featured a tiny, one-of-a-kind charm, our initials E and A, intricately intertwined in a silver knot. He was wearing her confession on his wrist. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it should have shattered me. To wear his lover's token, a gift from his own wife to that lover, to our marriage counseling session was a new dimension of disrespect. It was a silent, arrogant boast. A month ago, this revelation would have opened a sinkhole beneath my feet. Tears would have burned my eyes. A strangled sob would have escaped my lips, derailing his performance and plunging us back into the familiar, useless cycle of hysterical accusation and gaslighting denial. But as I stared at the glinting silver, I felt none of that. The hot, messy grief that had been my constant companion for the better part of a year had vanished, replaced by something else. Something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. It was a calm so profound it felt like a liberation. The game, with its unspoken rules and his constant cheating, was over. I was looking at the board for the first time with clear eyes, seeing every piece, every possible move. He was still talking, weaving his tapestry of deceit. I just watched the bracelet, his unwitting trophy, his accidental confession. And for the first time in this beige, suffocating room, I smiled. It was a small, secret smile, but it was mine. The game had changed, and I finally was ready to play. That evening, the heavy scent of roasting garlic and rosemary, my favorite, wafted through the sterile, minimalist house Liam had insisted we buy. He stood at the massive 6-burner gas stove, humming a cheerful tune, a perfect portrait of doting domesticity. The entire scene was designed to disarm me, to lull me back into the comfortable lie. "Good session today?" he asked, turning to wrap his arms around me. His body, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cage. The warmth of his skin against my back was a violation. I could feel the place where the bracelet must have been moments before, a phantom weight on his wrist. "Productive," I lied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. My own performance had to begin somewhere. I forced a smile that felt brittle, like it might crack my face. He kissed my temple, a gesture so devoid of genuine affection it was almost impressive. I'm glad. I really think we're turning a corner, Elle. I looked around the cavernous open-plan living space. The oversized abstract paintings he'd chosen, the cold leather sofa, the gallery white walls. I saw it all now for what it was, a meticulously crafted stage set. Every object, every framed photo of us smiling on a beach in Thailand or a ski slope in Aspen, was a prop for the lie we were living. He hadn't built a home with me. He had curated a backdrop for his double life. He served the pasta, a pappardelle with a slow-cooked ragu he knew I loved, his movements full of a casual, confident grace. He believed I was the same woman who had walked into that office this morning, fragile and broken. He believed his performance of contrition and the aroma of a home-cooked meal were enough to sedate me, to keep me in my designated role as the forgiving, slightly damaged wife. He had no idea she never walked out of that beige room. The woman who came home was a stranger to him. As he poured 2 glasses of expensive red wine, my phone, lying face down on the cold quartz countertop, gave a low buzz. I glanced at it. An unknown number. My heart gave a single, hard thump. Liam didn't notice. He was too busy explaining the wine's robust tannins. I palmed the phone, angling it away from him. The text was short, 6 cryptic words that lit a fuse in my mind. The bracelet is just the start. My blood ran cold. I took a steadying sip of wine, the tannins he was so proud of coating my tongue in bitterness. As I looked at him, so handsome and so false, another message from the same number appeared. Check the Vance Foundation's gala accounts. He's not the only one playing you. My sister, Amelia. It had to be. My mind reeled, connecting dots I hadn't even seen before. The foundation. Liam was the treasurer. Amelia was the event director. A perfect, self-contained ecosystem of deceit. The game was bigger and dirtier than I could have imagined, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The next day I met Amelia at our usual spot, the Daily Grind, a cafe where the cheerful clatter of ceramic and the rich, dark smell of burnt coffee had always felt like a sisterly ritual. Today, it felt like an interrogation room where I was both the detective and the victim. She was already there, seated at our favorite table by the window, the morning light glinting off her perfectly highlighted hair, and off the silver bracelet on her wrist. The charm, our intertwined initials, seemed to mock me from across the small wooden table. "You seem off, Ilara," she said, her brow furrowing with a practiced, perfect imitation of concern. Her eyes, so much like mine, were clear and bright. How could they hold so much deception? I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach across the table, rip the lie from her wrist, and demand to know how she could do this. How she could take a symbol of our sisterhood and twist it into a trophy for her affair with my husband. Instead, I manufactured a weak smile and took a slow sip of my black Americano. The bitterness was a welcome shock to my system. "Just work," I murmured, the lie coming more easily this time. "It's been draining." I let her talk. It was a masterful performance of self-absorption. She chattered on about her recent promotion at Vance Holdings, our family's company. She was now a vice president of community outreach, a title, I now realized, that was utterly meaningless, a reward for services rendered. Liam, as a senior executive, had undoubtedly orchestrated the entire thing. She complained about the stress, the long hours she was putting in for the upcoming annual fundraising gala. "Honestly, Elle, Liam and I are practically running the whole thing ourselves. Dad just signs the checks." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that made my stomach churn. She was telling me the truth, hiding it in plain sight, confident in my ignorance. I listened, my expression neutral, my heart a block of ice. She wasn't just complicit. She was a willing and eager participant. This wasn't a fling. This was a conspiracy. As I watched her, so easily corrupted, so blithely cruel, I knew I had to understand the full scope of the rot. As I stood to leave, I feigned a clumsy stumble. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I gasped as the hot dregs of my coffee sloshed from my cup, cascading down the front of her ridiculously expensive designer laptop bag. She shrieked, jumping up and dabbing at the stain with a napkin. "Ilara, this is suede!" "I'm so sorry, Ames," I said, my voice full of panic. In the ensuing chaos of apologies, frantic dabbing, and her dramatic laments, my movements were swift and precise. While her attention was on the imagined damage to her bag, I slid a tiny, voice-activated recorder, purchased from a spy shop that morning, into the bag's unzipped side pocket. It nestled there, a silent witness in waiting. What secrets, I wondered, would it hear in the boardrooms and bedrooms where I was no longer welcome? Sunday dinner at my parents' home was a weekly ritual of quiet compliance, an obligation I had always dreaded. The formal dining room, which my mother insisted on using even for the four of us, always felt cold, no matter the season. The air was heavy with the scent of her rich pot roast and my father's unspoken expectations. Tonight, the chill was bone deep. My father, Richard Vance, a man who equated love with stock performance and public perception, was holding court. "Liam is doing a tremendous job with the foundation," he declared, carving the roast with surgical precision. He looked at me, his gaze sharp and pointed. "He's a good man, Ilara, a real provider. You're lucky to have him." It wasn't an observation, it was a command. "Be grateful, stay in line." My mother, Catherine, chimed in, her voice soft but laced with steel. "All marriages require work, dear," she said, placing a serving of overcooked beans on my plate. "You need to be more supportive. A man like Liam, with so much pressure on him, needs a peaceful home to return to." They were a fortress of denial, their walls impenetrable. When I tried to gently raise the subject of our struggles, broaching the fact that we were in therapy, they shut me down with practiced ease. "Every couple has issues," my mother dismissed with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Don't air your dirty laundry, Ilara. It's unseemly." "The important thing is to present a united front," my father added, his jaw tight. "The Vance name means something in this city. Don't forget that." They didn't see a daughter in pain. They saw a volatile asset, a potential liability to a valuable business alliance they had forged through my marriage. I was an extension of their own ambition, and my personal happiness was, at best, a secondary concern. The feeling of absolute, profound isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. I was utterly, completely alone in this. Later, as I was helping clear the dishes, a role I was always relegated to while the men talked business, my hand brushed against my father's suit coat, which was slung over the back of his chair. I felt a sharp crinkle of paper in the breast pocket. On autopilot, my fingers closed around it, pulling it free. It was a folded receipt from De Vettimo, the most exclusive luxury jeweler in the city. My heart hammered against my ribs. The date was from 3 days ago. The item purchased was a men's solid gold chronograph watch, a model I knew cost more than my car. But it was the engraving instructions at the bottom of the receipt that made the world tilt on its axis. The tiny, elegant script specified the initials to be engraved on the back, not, quote, R.V., quote, for Richard Vance. They were, quote, L.V., quote, for Liam Vance. My father hadn't just been praising my husband. He had been rewarding him. This wasn't a family, it was a corporation, and I had just discovered I wasn't on the board of directors. I was the product being sold. The Vance Foundation's annual fundraising gala was the crown jewel of the city's vapid social calendar, a night where the wealthy congratulated themselves on their generosity by spending thousands on tickets, dresses, and auction items. The grand ballroom of the Regent Hotel shimmered with the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers and buzzed with the low hum of performative charity. The air was thick with the warring scents of expensive perfume. Liam was in his element. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, the perfect corporate husband and foundation treasurer. And, at his side, dripping in diamonds that I was certain the foundation had indirectly paid for, was Amelia. Her hand rested on his arm with an intimacy that screamed defiance. They weren't hiding, they were flaunting. They would laugh with a potential donor, and her head would tilt toward his, their bodies angled together, a silent, public declaration. I stood alone near a towering floral arrangement, a phantom at my own feast. The stares and whispers were like tiny, stinging insects. They all saw it. They all knew, and they were all watching to see what I would do. My mother materialized at my elbow, her grip like talons on my bare arm. "For God's sake, Ilara, smile," she hissed, her own face stretched into a rigid mask of social grace. "You look miserable. You're embarrassing us." The humiliation was a physical blow, a hot flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body, knocking the air from my lungs. My own mother, more concerned with appearances than with the blatant affair being conducted 10 feet away. They were celebrating their betrayal on a stage my family had built, and I was being reprimanded for not applauding. That was the last straw, the final push I needed. I inhaled deeply, straightened my spine until it was a rod of steel, and pasted a serene, unreadable mask onto my face. I detached myself from my mother's grasp and began to float through the crowd, my movements fluid and graceful. I became the woman they expected me to be. I made small talk with ancient board members. I complimented their wives on their gowns. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I was the perfect, docile wife, too timid and well-bred to disrupt this carefully orchestrated illusion. From across the room, Liam would occasionally glance my way, a flicker of something, guilt, pity, annoyance, in his eyes before he turned back to Amelia's adoring gaze. My invisibility, my apparent passivity, became my shield and my weapon. Because they were all watching me, they didn't see what I had done an hour before. The anonymous text had been my map. It led me to Mr. Chen, a quiet, meticulous forensic accountant who operated out of a small, dusty office in a part of town my family wouldn't be caught dead in. My college friend, now a bulldog of a corporate lawyer in New York, had recommended him. "He's a ghost," she'd said, "and he's the best." For 2 weeks, Mr. Chen had been my secret. We had communicated through encrypted emails and burner phones. He had unraveled the tangled mess of the Vance Foundation's finances with breathtaking speed. Before leaving for the gala, I had assembled his findings, his masterpiece, as he'd called it, into a plain, unassuming manila envelope. Inside was no less than a bombshell. Copies of bank statements from an offshore account, highlighted wire transfers, and a clear, undeniable paper trail showing how Liam Vance, as the Foundation's treasurer, had systematically siphoned nearly $250,000 into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The sole director of that corporation, according to the documents Mr. Chen had procured, was Amelia Clark. I had walked into the Regent Hotel through a service entrance, dressed in my silk gown, and found the designated press room. It was empty, a quiet staging area for the media who would arrive later to snap photos of the city's elite. On a long table, place cards were set out for the major outlets. I found the one for Sarah Jenkins of the City Tribune. She was the city's most relentless investigative journalist, a woman who had taken down a city councilman and a corrupt police chief. She had a reputation for prizing anonymous sources above all else. I slipped the envelope under her notepad. It was a simple, quiet act that felt more powerful than any scream. Now on the stage, Liam was at the podium, bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight, halfway through a sanctimonious speech about corporate responsibility and the importance of giving back. That's when Sarah Jenkins, who had arrived late and was standing near the back, raised her voice. It was sharp and clear, slicing through the polite applause like a shard of glass. "Mr. Vance, a question if I may." Liam paused, blinking, momentarily irritated at being interrupted. "Of course, Sarah. Can you comment on the allegations that you've been embezzling funds from this very foundation to a private shell corporation under the direction of Miss Amelia Clark?" A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Panic, like a contagion, ignited across the ballroom. Phones shot up, their red recording lights blinking like malevolent eyes. The pop and flash of cameras from the press section was like a sudden burst of gunfire. Liam froze. The blood drained from his handsome face, leaving it a sickly, waxy color. His confident smile collapsed into a slack-jawed gape. He looked like he'd been shot. Amelia, standing just off stage, looked wildly around, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it was almost beautiful. My father, seated at the head table, looked as if he was having a stroke, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. I remained near the back of the room, by the flowers, a silent spectator to the beautiful, controlled demolition of their world. Liam stammered out a denial, a weak, unconvincing string of words that no one believed, but the seed of doubt, the poison of the accusation was already spreading through the room, through the city. The panic in his eyes was the most satisfying thing I had seen in a decade. As two burly hotel security guards awkwardly flanked a sputtering, protesting Liam and escorted him from the stage, my father cornered me by the exit. His face was a mask of pure fury, his voice a low, venomous whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "What?" he hissed, his fingers digging into my arm again. "Have you done?" Before I could formulate an answer, my clutch bag vibrated. I pulled out the burner phone Meister Chen had given me, a text from him. "They're spooked, trying to move the funds from the Cayman account to another one in Panama now. We have less than 24 hours to freeze it before it vanishes for good." The game had just entered a new, faster phase, and the clock was ticking. The scandal detonated across the city with the force of a bomb. The gala, meant to be a showcase of Vance family prestige, had become a public relations inferno. To control the narrative, or at least attempt to, my father convened an emergency board meeting at Vance Holdings headquarters the very next day. I was summoned, not as a stakeholder, not as a family member with a voice, but as a prop, the disgraced wife, an accessory to the spectacle. I walked into the sterile, wood-paneled boardroom on the top floor, a room I had been in 100 times for holiday parties and formal announcements. Today, it felt like a courtroom where I was already presumed guilty. The air was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive cologne, and a new, acrid stench. Fear. The board members, all men my father's age who had known me since I was a child, stared at me with a mixture of pity and accusation. "You had to have known, Ilara," sneered Robert Sterling, my father's right-hand man, his jowls quivering with indignation. "A wife always knows." My father, looking haggard and 20 years older, stood at the head of the long, polished table and proposed their damage control plan. It was a sham, a desperate attempt to sweep the filth under the corporate rug. Liam and Amelia would take an immediate and indefinite leave of absence. The company would conduct a thorough internal review, headed by Robert Sterling himself. They would bury the scandal and wait for it to blow over. Then came the final, brutal insult. My father turned his exhausted, furious eyes on me. "Ilara," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "you will issue a public statement. A statement of your unwavering support for your husband and your complete faith in his integrity. You will say this story is a malicious lie and that you stand by him." They weren't just asking me to be silent. They were demanding I become their liar-in-chief, their willing accomplice in a cover-up. Liam, sitting at the far end of the table, shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, as if this was all my fault. As if my discovery of his sins was a greater crime than the sins themselves. Their arrogance was my greatest asset. I knew what I had to do. I lowered my gaze to my hands, folded primly in my lap. I let the silence in the room stretch, feeling their collective, impatient expectation. They wanted tears. They wanted submission. They wanted the weak, emotional Ilara they had always known. I gave her to them. I allowed a single, perfectly timed tear to slip from my eye and trace a path down my cheek. I looked up, my expression a mask of heartbroken fragility. "Of course," I whispered, my voice trembling with a masterful, manufactured tremor. "Whatever is best for the family." The collective tension in the room instantly dissipated. A few of the board members nodded in grim satisfaction. My father visibly relaxed, a sigh of relief escaping his lips. Liam, from his end of the table, shot me a triumphant, contemptuous smirk. He had won again. They all believed they still controlled me. Their passivity was a screen for my own secret offensive. The day before, immediately after the gala, I had made a call. Not to a friend, not to my mother, but to Jessica Chen, my college roommate who was now a high-powered take-no-prisoners attorney in New York. The same friend who had recommended the accountant, Mr. Chen. No relation, a cosmic coincidence that made me smile. Guided by Jessica's crisp, strategic advice, I had taken my next step. Yesterday afternoon, I had walked into the imposing granite facade of the Regional Securities and Exchange Commission building downtown. The air inside was cool and quiet, smelling of paper and immense bureaucratic power. I wasn't there as a scorned wife. I was there as a shareholder. My shares, a small inheritance from my grandmother that my father had always dismissed as a token, gave me legal standing. I sat across from two serious, impassive agents in a small, windowless room. I didn't cry. I didn't editorialize. I simply presented the facts. I gave them a copy of Mr. Chen's entire financial dossier. Then, I gave them the crown jewel from my secret recording of Amelia. It was a crystal-clear audio clip, captured the day of our coffee meeting when she'd tossed her bag into her car. On the recording, she and Liam, speaking on her car's hands-free system, were laughing as they discussed creating fake invoices to cover the embezzled funds, even mocking my father's clueless oversight of the Foundation's books. This wasn't an anonymous tip. It was a formal, signed, and submitted whistleblower complaint, alleging shareholder fraud, embezzlement, and a litany of other federal crimes. I was demanding a full federal investigation. 2 days later, my father stood on the steps of Vance Holdings before a throng of news cameras. He was giving his prepared speech, assuring the public of the company's unwavering commitment to a thorough internal review. Right on cue, as if directed by a filmmaker with a flair for the dramatic, 2 stern-faced federal agents in dark suits walked past the media circus, through the revolving glass doors, and into the Vance Holdings lobby. They held up a warrant to the shocked receptionist. The live television broadcast captured everything. The chaos that erupted, the agents calmly seizing computers, boxing up financial records, their movements methodical and unstoppable. The shocked, terrified faces of employees peering out from their cubicles. The story exploded online, the headlines writing themselves. Federal agents raid Vance Holdings amid embezzlement scandal. The company stock, already wounded, nosedived into oblivion. I watched it all on a large television screen in a quiet, sun-drenched downtown cafe. The rich aroma of a dark roast coffee, a comforting anchor in the storm. I watched live footage of Liam, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending disbelief, being escorted from the building in handcuffs. I watched Amelia being cornered by a mob of reporters as she tried to flee to her car, her face dissolving into hysterical sobs. They had wanted me to be their shield. Instead, I had become the sword. My personal phone, not the burner, rang, shattering the victorious moment. The caller ID was as mother. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately, her persistence a frantic drumbeat. I finally answered. "How could you?" she shrieked, her voice ragged with a fury that curdled my blood. "How could you do this to your own family? You have destroyed us. You have destroyed your father." I said nothing. I simply ended the call. A moment later, a new text message popped up on the screen. It was from Jessica. "They're offering Liam a plea deal. He rolls on his accomplice, gives them everything. He gets a lighter sentence. Guess who he's choosing to sacrifice?" The answer was as obvious as it was pathetic. He would choose himself. He would always choose himself. He would feed Amelia to the wolves to save his own skin. The city was a hive, buzzing with the spectacular, high society implosion of the Vance family. Every news channel, every blog, every paper was plastered with photos of my disgraced family. I had taken refuge in an anonymous, upscale business hotel across town, the quiet, minimalist silence of the room a profound luxury. I had turned off my personal phone, letting my mother's hysterical voicemails and my father's threatening texts pile up in a digital graveyard. Jessica's call confirmed my suspicions. She had a source inside the U.S. Attorney's Office. "Liam's counsel is officially advising him to pin everything on Amelia," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "They're building the narrative as we speak. She was the ambitious seductress, the mastermind who preyed on his misplaced affection and stressful work life. He was the foolish, love-struck victim." The sheer, spineless predictability of it all made me laugh, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed in the silent hotel room. Of course. In their world, the man is never truly at fault. He is merely led astray by a scheming woman. My own family was no better. My mother had escalated her campaign of emotional warfare, leaving long, rambling, tear-filled voicemails that were masterpieces of manipulative grief. They were arias of guilt and accusation, begging me to fix this, to recant my story, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. My father, through his lawyer, had sent a formal, menacing letter. It was a thinly veiled threat. If I didn't cooperate and publicly discredit the federal investigation, they would countersue. They would paint me as a mentally unstable, vindictive spouse who had fabricated the entire story out of jealousy. They would use the family's remaining influence and financial resources to ruin me and my name for good. They were cornered animals, thrashing and biting, blinded by their own panic. I sipped the peppermint tea I'd ordered from room service, the steam warming my face, and I felt a profound, unshakable calm. They couldn't touch me. Their threats were the dying gasps of a power that no longer existed. There was a soft knock on my hotel room door. My body went rigid. I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A young bellhop stood there, holding a small, elegant white box from a high-end florist. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the door a crack. "I didn't order anything," I said. "It was sent for you, ma'am, for the guest in room 1208. I took the box, my hands trembling slightly. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, perfect white orchid. The first flower Liam ever gave me, on our first date. It was a symbol of our beginning, now sent as a threat at our end. Beneath the blossom was a simple, terrifying note, folded in half. The handwriting was his familiar, confident script. "I know you're here. We need to talk. Alone?" It wasn't a request. It was a summons. A violation of the sanctuary I had tried to build. He was still trying to play the game, still believed he could control me. "Don't go, Ilara. It's a trap." Jessica's voice was frantic over the burner phone. "He's desperate. A desperate man is a dangerous man. Let the lawyers handle it." "I have to see him," I said, my voice more resolute than I felt. "I need to look him in the eye. I won't be afraid of him anymore." But I wasn't foolish. Against Jessica's strenuous objections, I agreed to the meeting, but I chose the battlefield, not some quiet bar or secluded park bench. I texted him the location, the Central Food Court at the Galleria Mall downtown, precisely at 12:30 p.m., the peak of the chaotic lunch rush. Maximum witnesses, zero intimacy, a symphony of noise that would drown out any attempt at intimidation. I got there early and chose a small table in the center of the chaos, the air thick with the smell of pizza grease and sugary cinnamon rolls. I sat with my back to a concrete pillar, giving me a clear view of the entire space. He arrived looking like a ghost. The impeccably tailored designer suit he wore hung loosely on his shrunken frame. Dark, bruised-looking circles were hollowed out beneath his eyes, and his skin had a pasty, unhealthy pallor. He moved through the crowd of shoppers and office workers like a man walking to his own execution. He smelled of fear and stale coffee. "Ilara," he said, his voice a hoarse, raspy whisper as he slid into the cheap plastic chair opposite me. He didn't apologize. He didn't show an ounce of remorse. He launched directly into a pathetic, self-pitying monologue. It was all Amelia's fault. Her ambition had been voracious. My father had put unbearable pressure on him to succeed. The market was volatile. It was a torrent of excuses, a desperate attempt to reframe himself as the victim. He leaned in, his eyes, once so full of confident charm, now wild with pleading. "Just tell them you were mistaken, Elle. Tell the feds you were emotional, that you misinterpreted things. That's all it would take. I'll give you anything you want in the divorce. The house, a generous settlement, anything. We can make this all go away." He reached his hand across the table, trying to take mine. I snatched my hand back as if from a hot stove. "The bracelet," I said, my voice dangerously level, cutting through his stream of lies. "Wearing it to our therapy session. Was that your idea or hers?" The question threw him completely. He flinched, his eyes darting around the noisy food court as if looking for an escape route. He couldn't meet my gaze. He stammered, trying to form a response, but no words came out. The simple, direct question had short-circuited his entire narrative of victimhood. It was all the confirmation I needed. "It doesn't matter," he finally snarled, his desperation curdling into a dark, ugly malice. "It doesn't matter. My father has something on you. From before you met me. He told me. He said it's enough to make this all go away for us, and make you look like the criminal." His eyes, now empty of their pleading, were cold as steel, and for the first time I felt a genuine sliver of ice slide down my spine. Liam's threat was a desperate, pathetic gambit, and my gut told me it was a bluff. But it ignited my final resolve. It was time to burn the last bridge. It was time to deploy my final weapon against Amelia. The audio recorder had captured more than just the dry details of financial fraud. I had been holding back the most poisonous part, saving it for the right moment. Liam's threat was that moment. I returned to my hotel room, my hands steady now, my purpose clear. I opened my encrypted laptop and sent a new, password-protected audio file to Sarah Jenkins at the Tribune. The subject line was simple: the motive. This time the clip wasn't about money. It was about cruelty. It was the recording of Amelia, laughing with Liam in her car, laughing about how she'd always been able to manipulate my pathetic artistic sensibilities. And then came the confession. The words that had knocked the wind out of me when I first heard them, and still did. I mean, that stupid painting she was doing for her senior project, Amelia's voice said, dripping with disdain. All that talk about the emotional resonance of her brushstrokes. God, she was so dramatic, I couldn't stand it. So I accidentally knocked over the turpentine can onto it the night before it was due. She was devastated. Amelia let out a high-pitched, cruel laugh. Best part is, she blamed herself for being careless. She carried that failure for years. It was perfect. That painting had been my masterpiece. It was my ticket to a prestigious scholarship to study art in Florence, a dream I had nurtured my entire life. Its destruction had shattered my confidence, not just as an artist, but as a person. I had dropped out of my master's program a semester later, convinced I was a fraud, a failure who didn't have what it took. I had carried that shame, that deep, corroding belief in my own inadequacy, for a decade. And she had done it. My own sister. Out of simple, petty jealousy. The story broke the next morning. Not on the business page, but on the front page. The headline was brutal. The Vance Scandal, a sister's cruel betrayal. The article included a full transcript of the audio. The public narrative, which might have held a sliver of sympathy for Amelia as a woman led astray by a powerful man, evaporated in an instant. The story was no longer about complex white-collar crime. It was a simple human story of cruelty. Now she was just a monster. That afternoon, my burner phone rang. The caller ID said, "Office of the Dean, Oak Ridge University." My heart stopped. It was my old art school. I answered, my hand trembling. It was the dean himself, a man named Peterson. His voice was heavy with apology. "Miss Vance, Elara," he began. "The news story this morning. It has prompted an internal review. Your former professor, Elias Thorne, came to my office this morning racked with guilt. He has just given a formal statement. He confessed that he had suspected sabotage at the time, but he was pressured by your father, who was a major donor to the arts program, to dismiss it as an unfortunate accident." I sank onto the edge of the hotel bed. The phone pressed hard against my ear. "The university would like to offer you our most profound and sincere public apology," the dean continued, his voice earnest. "And something else. We would like to offer you a solo exhibition in the university's main gallery for the upcoming spring season. And, if you would consider it, a position as our visiting artist in residence. My stolen future. My murdered dream. It was being handed back to me, resurrected from the ashes of their lies. It was a vindication so total, so complete, it left me breathless.